let's talk a little bit about usually where we talk about the intel first is from the perspective of Iraq, because ultimately it always seems to come down to Iraq. And now is no different. Tonight is no different. Let's go to where we are and what's going on there. We said on Tuesday's call that the IMF meeting, which was on Tuesday morning, was a success. And it was such a success that the IMF congratulated the CBI, the Central Bank of Iraq, for providing what it was they needed to provide. And doing that actually earlier or more quickly than was anticipated by the IMF. They did come with a rate. They came with whatever it was that the IMF was looking for, and they checked all the boxes. And that was very positive. So they congratulated the CBI for having done that. All right? Now, as far as what has occurred since that meeting, which we believe was a success, we understood that as part of that, whenever that rate was actually given to the IMF, whenever it was approved or checked off on by the IMF, we understand that they have 72 hours, Iraq has 72 hours since that time to release the rate or have the rate out and visible, okay, for all the world to see. Now, I think we're coming up fairly closely by sometime either late tonight or tomorrow to hitting that 72-hour period. That's what it appears to, if I do my math right. Now, what's interesting is Iraq did what they needed to do, and they also had an anti-money laundering law that was voted on and needed to be enacted, put into law. I believe that has occurred, that they have done that. They've talked about it. I knew they read it twice, and they were going to do the third reading. I believe it was on Tuesday, and then it was going to be enacted. I believe they've done that. And I believe the only thing that I can see that Iraq needs to do is make that rate for the dinar, the new Iraqi dinar rate, known. Put that rate out. Now, let's talk about how we know that. We know that certain people with the key cards, even in Iraq, as I mentioned on Tuesday's call, had access to new funds from oil and gas exploration. The shared profits from oil actually was on their card, and they could access that. And that happened, I believe it was Tuesday morning. Now, other Iraqi citizens outside of Iraq also have those cards, and they were noticing certain fluctuation in the rates that were on those cards as they started to increase. And those rates started to increase to the point where all of a sudden, I think they pretty much hit that rate that we talked about in the past. Pretty much what it was, and then all of a sudden, the screens went blank. They went blank. It was as if they hit what they needed to hit, and then they took it away so that when the time is right, they can drop it right back in again. That was sort of the feeling of what's going on over the last, let's call it 2 days. Now, so I think from that perspective, everything's done, and we're just waiting on the exact timing for the drop-in of the rate. That's what it appears. Let's talk a little bit more about Iraq. Iraq had money that had been stolen, and we're talking about dinar. And at the old rate, let's call it the 1160 rate or whatever it was, okay? At the old rate, there was approximately a little over $150 million worth of dinar I'm going to say it this way. There was over 150 million dinar. No, I'm going to stay with dollars. Dollars worth of dinar at the old rate that was returned to Iraq at a little after 5 in the morning this morning. All of this had been brought back, had been stolen, and let's call it repatriated to Iraq, to the CBI. And the thinking was that once that had occurred and that money had been repatriated, that Iraq could go and put out their new rate at any time once they had achieved that. Okay, that was early this morning. Now, the other thing is, you remember months ago we talked about Iraq offering infrastructure bonds to the tune of $1 trillion. And I said that we knew of some people that might have taken advantage of those at that time. They actually pre-booked those. Okay, they pre-booked some of those bonds. Today, from 9:30 this morning to 3:40 this afternoon, Baghdad time, all $1 trillion worth of those bonds were sold. Guys, that's $1 trillion worth of Iraqi infrastructure bonds. They had to be purchased in lots of no less than $1 billion. Okay? But they were all sold in, let's call it a little over half a day. From 9:30 to 3:40 in the afternoon, sold out. Now, one reason they were sold out, they've got a good yield. These were bonds that will be payable for 6 years. So it's a short-term hold, and they're going to be paying at 6.75% interest per year. Now, if you know bonds and bond values, that is a really, really good deal. And that's one reason they probably sold so fast. What's the other reason? The other reason is, guess what? They're gold-backed. Those bonds are gold-backed by Iraq. So they're kind of safe, not a whole lot of risk, probably a very high rating. And that's one reason that Iraq wants to have a good relationship with the IMF. Because even though IMF was making them a loan, and is making them a loan, they don't really need the money, but they need the rating. They need the credit rating. And that's why Iraq has to do what they needed to do for the purpose of IMF, is because they want a solid credit rating. They're getting ready to entertain business from all over the world. And they've got a very low, I think it's a zero tax structure in place for businesses that want to locate in Iraq. And, I don't know the particulars about it, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But I'm telling you, the sale of those bonds, $1 trillion worth today, that's pretty powerful. That says a lot. Could they offer $1 trillion worth of Iraqi infrastructure bonds without a rate? I don't know. Certainly not with an 1160 rate or whatever it was. Guys, you realize, and when I hear stuff about 1-to-1, I just laugh. 1-to-1. Come on. They've had a rate on their cards in Iraq, on their debit cards, for at least 6 or 8 months, maybe a year now, in the $4 or $5 range. We know that. All right. So forget 1-to-1. Just drop it out of your memory. It's ridiculous. All right. So what about what Dr. Shabibi said back in 2012? Remember we talked about the rate that he said Iraq could sustain? I think we might have referenced it a couple of calls ago. I wouldn't be surprised by it. Let me just tell you, I wouldn't be surprised at all. All right, so enough about Iraq. Iraq is basically done. They just need to reveal that rate. They need to show it. And I think that they have a limited amount of time. according to the IMF, to do that. And I think we're getting close to the end of that window, just to let you know. Now, let's move over to this side of the pond. We understand that exchanges have already begun in Hong Kong, already begun in Europe, and they're just working their way to us. I know it sounds simple, but that's one thing that I've heard. We've also heard that certain transactions have already taken place in terms of out west. Certain things are being paid. We know that people that have exchanged yesterday and even today will have access to funds on Saturday. I have to believe that the process, and I'm talking about paymasters, I'm talking about groups, talking about, trustees, all of those terms that we use are hydrated and ready for a go signal. They're just waiting for a go. They might be waiting for codes. I don't know. But whatever they're waiting for, they should be starting to pay those out essentially, and pay those SKRs out at the same time, pretty close to the same time that we get notified for our 800 number. We know redemption centers are still on high alert. We know that they're on lockdown. We know that they are ready to go at a moment's notice. Same thing with Tier 1 and Tier 2 banks. We believe Tier 3 banks are far enough along where they're not an impediment to this process, even though it took them a while to get there. But everybody basically is ready to go. So, do we know when the go signal is? No, we don't. And it'd be foolish for us to try to call it. Do I hear times when I think it might go? Yes, I do. And then have they not happened? Yes, they have not happened. But it doesn't make me lose hope. It doesn't make me lose faith in the process. Because I know at the end of the rainbow, our pot of gold is there. And we will be there to receive that blessing. So I can tell you that, everything we believe with our currency, the USN, has been complete. We think all documentation has been signed off on. We think that the gold that needed to be in place, not only for Iraq, but for us, is there to back everything. In other words, it's taken a little while to move everything around. We've heard the USN needs a little bit more verification. It needs a little bit more of the registration, that type of thing. There might be a few little final details with paperwork. That's a term, isn't it? Paperwork that might need to be completed, but it's from what we understand, the process is basically ready to go. We know people are still exchanging. We know that certain banks are calling in certain individuals to come in. Now, do they have full access to their funds yet? No, they don't. They don't. But the most recent are not SKR'd, but they might as well be because they've got accounts that show probably a pending amount. Yeah, there's money, I can see it in the account, but it's pending, I can't touch it, that kind of thing. But they have a time frame, coming up over the weekend where they should be able to get access to it. So, I think you guys we're right there where we want to be. And I think that everybody knows that we're at the end, and now we just need to stay patient, stay in faith, and believe for this to come through. Can't tell you what day or what time, but I can tell you that I think that we are right there at the end of the ride. That's how I would say it. So, with that said, I think what I'm going to do is just thank everybody for coming into the call. I mean, I went heavy duty last time on Tuesday about infrastructure. I talked to you guys about the Rebuild America program. Fits right in with Making America Great Again. It just dovetails beautifully with that. I'm hoping, and as I understand it, we're going to offer $1 trillion worth of infrastructure, uh, spending. I hate that the government has to spend that. I hate that it has to come out of the government when we could do it privately through the private sector. And maybe there's a way to do that. Maybe the administration has a plan for that. We certainly suggested that we would be interested in some bonds to cover infrastructure like they did in Iraq that they sold out in about what? Let's call it 7 hours. They sold out of those $1 trillion worth of bonds. You think we could do that here? Well, we could if it would pay 6.75%, couldn't we? But seriously, I wish we had a competitive program like that could be offered for infrastructure, because you know what? $1 trillion would be a drop in the bucket for this crowd. 10 trillion would be a drop in the bucket for this group. And I think they know that. So maybe they'll offer that to us to be able to help rebuild America. Okay? So we've got Rebuild America.